Miley Cyrus has known Dolly Parton her entire life, and she's revealing what the country legend is really like behind closed doors. From her private struggles to her secretive marriage, there's one side of Dolly she says the public never gets to see. For almost 60 years, people have believed they know Dolly Parton, and they are half right. The other half, the part no biographer ever quite reached and no reporter ever pinned down, was finally described out loud by a woman Dolly has known since before she was born. Her name is Miley Cyrus. Dolly held her when she was new. Dolly wrote her mother's day letters and cooked her cornbread and told her the truth when nobody else would. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, Miley became the one person on earth who could stand in front of a camera and tell the rest of us what Dolly Parton is actually like. When the wigs come off and the lights go down, the line she used is small and quiet, and it may be the truest sentence anyone has ever said about Dolly. She said Dolly lets everyone in, and no one in at the same time. Everyone feels like they know her, and everyone is fine with the fact that they will never see her without the makeup, without what Miley called the full drag. Sit with that for a second. Everyone in and no one in. A woman the whole world calls a friend, who has never once let the whole world see her real face. That is the truth Miley revealed. It is not a scandal. It is not a secret marriage or a hidden child or a buried crime, though there are people who have spent decades looking for exactly those things and coming up empty. What Miley described was stranger and gentler than any of that. She described a woman who gives away her whole heart in public and keeps one small thing back on purpose for reasons that go all the way down to the bottom of who she is. And to understand what Miley saw, you have to go back, not to Nashville, not to the Wigs or the Rhinestones or the first hit record. You have to go back further than that, before any of the armor existed, to a one-room cabin in the Tennessee mountains where a little girl was learning the lesson that would shape every single thing that came after. She was born on January 19, 1946, in a place called Locust Ridge, in the Smoky Mountains, up where the roads turned to mud and the winter came in hard. Her father paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. That is not a colorful detail somebody added later to make the story sing. That is the plain arithmetic of the family she came from. There were 12 children. Dolly was the fourth. The cabin had no electricity and no running water, and the family slept stacked together for warmth. And when a new baby was born, the older ones took turns holding it through the night so their mother could sleep. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, could not read or write. He was a tobacco farmer and a construction worker who did the hardest labor there was and never made much for it. Her mother, Avie Lee, was sick often and pregnant often and sang the old mountain ballads while she worked. The sad ones, the ones about death and lost love and children who don't come home. Picture that house. Picture a girl in it who is not like the others. Because here is the first thing to understand about Dolly Parton. She was not a shy child who learned to perform. She was a performer from the beginning, in a family and a place that had no use for one. She made up songs before she could write them down. She nailed a tin can to a stick and pretended it was a microphone and sang to the chickens and the pigs and anyone who would hold still. The talent was there early and it was loud. And in a house with 11 other children and no money, being loud was the only way to be seen at all. So the defining quality shows up young. Dolly wanted to be looked at. She needed it the way other children need food. And in a mountain culture built on humility, on not getting above your raising, on keeping your head down and your wants small, that hunger came with a cost she would pay for the rest of her life. Wanting to be seen is a dangerous thing to be born with when everyone around you is trying not to be. She has told the story of the coat many times, and it never stops being the key to her. Her mother made her a school coat out of scraps, rags really, little pieces of cloth in every color, sewn together because there was nothing else to sew. And as she stitched, Avie Lee told her daughter the Bible story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, the one his father made for him because he loved him best. So the girl walked to school proud of that coat, wearing it like a queen wears a robe, believing every color in it was a piece of her mother's love, made into something you could put on. The other children laughed at her. They saw rags. They told her she was poor and the coat proved it. And one of them said she couldn't be proud of a coat made out of rags. And they held her in the schoolhouse to make her admit she had nothing on underneath, because no child that poor could own a real shirt. She did have a shirt on, but the shame of that moment went in like a splinter and stayed. Now watch what she did with it. Watch closely, because this is the whole story in one small child. She did not decide the coat was ugly. She did not decide her mother was wrong to make it. She decided that the problem was them, that they had failed to see what the coat really was, and that one day she would make herself so bright and so undeniable that no one could ever look at her and see rags again. She would build a version of herself the mountain could not laugh at. She would be the most looked at woman anybody had ever seen, and she would do it on purpose, and she would never let anyone catch her looking poor or plain or unfinished ever again. That is where the armor starts, not in Nashville, in a schoolroom in the Smoky Mountains, with a coat made of rags and a ring of laughing children. And the model for what that armor would look like was already walking around her hometown. There was a woman in the nearby town, and Dolly has described her 100 times with something close to reverence. She had bright yellow hair, piled up and bleached. She wore tight skirts and high heels and bright red lipstick and rouge, and she smelled like perfume. And the grown-ups whispered that she was trash, the town tramp, a woman no decent girl should want to be. And little Dolly looked at her and felt the exact opposite of what she was supposed to feel. She thought that woman was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She thought, that is what I want to look like. That is glamour. That is a woman nobody laughs at. So the look that the world would one day call a costume was not a costume at all, not to her. It was a poor mountain child's idea of the most beautiful woman alive, built out of the one glamorous person she had ever actually seen in the flesh. The tall hair, the painted face, the tight, bright clothes. She was copying an angel. It just happened to be an angel the church ladies called a tramp. The look was one inheritance from that mountain. The music was the other, and it came from a different room in the same poor house. It came from her mother first, from Avie Lee singing the old ballads while she worked. The mournful mountain songs carried over from the old country and kept alive in the hollows, songs about drowned girls and dead babies and lovers who never came back. A child raised on those learns young that a song can hold a grief too big to say any other way. And it came from the church, from her grandfather, a Pentecostal preacher named Jake Owens, who wrote hymns and shouted the gospel and taught a little girl that music and feeling and God all lived in the same place, that you sang because something inside you had to get out or burst. Dolly grew up in a faith that let you weep and holler and testify, and she has never lost it. And it is the one part of her that has never needed a wig, because it was real before she knew how to build anything false. So picture the two rooms of that cabin. In one, a girl is learning to make herself bright and undeniable, so the world can never shame her again. In the other, the same girl is learning that the deepest truth of a person comes out in a song, raw and plain and naked. The tension between those two rooms is the tension of her entire life. The armor that hides everything, and the songs that hide nothing. She would spend 80 years being both at once, the most guarded woman in show business, and the most emotionally honest songwriter of her generation, telling you everything in her music and showing you nothing on her face. Nobody ever taught her those two things could not go together, so she did both. Here is the question that hangs over everything that comes next. If a little girl decides, at 6 or 7 years old, that she will never again let the world see her unfinished, what does she become at 30, at 50, at 80? What does a whole life, built on that one decision, look like from the inside? Miley Cyrus is the only person who ever really answered that, but she couldn't answer it yet. Nobody could. First, the girl had to get down off the mountain and find out if the world would let her build the self she designed. And the road down was harder than the road up ever is. She got her first guitar at 8. A real one, small and battered. And by 10, she was singing on local radio and television in Knoxville, a mountain child in front of a microphone that finally wasn't a tin can. By 13, she was standing on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, the church of country music, introduced by Johnny Cash. Most children that age are still learning who they are. Dolly already knew. She had known since the schoolroom. The morning after she graduated high school in 1964, she got on a bus and left for Nashville. She was 17. She has said her whole family came to the bus station to see her off, and that she cried, and that she also could not wait for the door to close. She had a cardboard suitcase and a set of dreams she'd been polishing since she was a child, and she had almost no money at all, and she went anyway. The mountain had told her to keep her wants small. She was carrying the biggest wants in Tennessee. And on her very first day in the city, before she'd sung a note for anyone, she met the man who would spend the next 60 years being the one person allowed to see behind the armor. She was doing her laundry. That is the whole glamorous story of how Dolly Parton met the love of her life. She was standing outside the wishy-washy laundromat on her first day in town, a country girl with wet clothes and no idea where anything was. And a young man drove by in a white Chevrolet, and he circled back, and he told her later that he saw her and thought, "That is the girl I am going to marry." His name was Carl Dean. He ran an asphalt paving business. He was quiet in the exact proportion that she was not. Introduce him carefully, because he matters more than almost anyone in this story, and the public was never allowed to know him at all. Carl Dean was not a shy man who hid from fame. He was a private man who had no interest in it whatsoever, which is a different thing and a rarer one. He did not want the red carpets. He did not want the awards shows. He did not want strangers to know his face or his name or his opinions. He wanted a wife, a quiet house, a truck, and the freedom to go camping without anybody taking his picture. And he married a woman who would become one of the most photographed human beings on the planet. What they built together over the decades was a marriage nobody outside it ever got to watch, which is precisely why nobody outside it could believe it was real. They liked simple things. They took long driving trips through the South, just the two of them, no cameras, no crowd, stopping wherever they felt like stopping. They went camping. He cooked for her sometimes, plain food, and she has said some of the happiest hours of her life were the ordinary quiet ones in his company, the ones no fan will ever see a photograph of, because no photograph exists. He came to watch her perform exactly once in their whole life together, stood in the back, told her afterward that he was proud of her, and that once was enough, and he meant it kindly, and she understood, because she knew he loved her and not the show. That was the deal. She would give the show to the world, he would keep the woman. For decades, the tabloids insisted he could not be real, that a husband that invisible had to be a fiction. And the two of them let the rumor run and went camping. She has said she had the best of both worlds, the whole planet's love out front, and one man's quiet love at home. The two kept so carefully apart that neither one could ever spoil the other. They married in secret in 1966, across the state line in Ringgold, Georgia, where a young couple could do it fast and quiet. She was 20, he was 23. They told almost no one. Her record label had told her not to marry at all, because a single girl sells better than a married one, so they kept it hidden. And then they just kept it hidden as a habit, and then they kept it hidden for the rest of their lives. For decades, this created the strangest rumor in show business, because Carl Dean stayed so completely out of view, because he almost never appeared beside her, because there were entire years where no photograph of him surfaced. People began to whisper that he did not exist, that Dolly had invented a husband, that the marriage was a cover story, a beard, a public relations trick to hide something else. She heard all of it. She let it run. She has said that Carl only came to see her perform once in their entire life together, and that he stood in the back, and that afterward he told her he was proud of her, but he never needed to do that again. Think about what that marriage actually was and hold on to it, because it is the first proof of the thing Miley would name much later. Here was a woman who gave herself to the whole world, endlessly, warmly, generously. And here was the one relationship she refused to give the world any part of it all. Everyone in and one door closed. The pattern was there before the fame, before the wigs got tall, before anybody was watching. She had a public self she handed out freely, and a private life she guarded like a mother guards a sleeping child. She just hadn't met the person yet who would explain it to us. But first came the man who tried to own the public self entirely. And to understand Dolly's whole life, you have to understand what he did to her and what she did back. His name was Porter Wagoner, and in 1967, he was one of the biggest stars in country music. He had a syndicated television show that went into homes all across the American South and beyond, and he wore rhinestone suits covered in wagon wheels and cactus, and his own name. And he had a big blonde pompadour and a big personality. And when he needed a new girl singer for his show, he took a chance on a 21-year-old from the mountains with a high, strange, beautiful voice and hair. She was already teasing up toward the sky. He put her on national television. That is the part people forget when they tell this story as a simple tale of a bad man. Porter Wagoner opened the door. He gave Dolly Parton her first real audience, week after week, and he sang with her and mentored her and taught her the business and believed in her voice when she was still an unknown. The partnership made her. For years they were a duet act, Porter and Dolly, and the records sold and the fans loved them. And it worked. And it slowly became a cage. Because here is the thing about a man who finds gold. He does not want to share it, and he does not want to lose it. And those two wants can turn a mentor into a jailer without him ever deciding to be cruel. Porter Wagoner had discovered something rare, and the more the world responded to Dolly, the more he needed to hold on, and the tighter he held, the more she felt the walls. He wanted her on his show. He wanted his name on her songs. He wanted, in the way of a man who has built something, to be the reason it existed. And Dolly, who had come down off a mountain specifically to become her own undeniable self, began to feel the old feeling from the schoolroom, the feeling of being held in place while she tried to become something bigger. They fought. By her own account, they fought constantly, hard for years. She has called him, looking back, a male chauvinist pig and said it with a laugh, but she was not entirely joking. He could not stand for her to want more than he could give her, and she wanted the whole world. Look closer at what the cage was actually made of, because it was not iron. It was made of a contract and a television show, and a man's need to be the reason she existed. Porter Wagoner's name was on that show, and he wanted her songs to run through his hands, and there were fights about which songs went where, and who got what, and whose vision won. There is a famous one, small on the surface and huge underneath, over a song called To Daddy. Dolly wanted to give it to Emmylou Harris. Porter did not want her to. It became a real battle, because it was never really about one song. It was about whether Dolly Parton got to decide where her own gifts went, or whether the man who put her on television got to decide for her. She gave the song away. She won that one. But every win came at the cost of another fight, and the fights never stopped. And a woman cannot build the biggest self in Tennessee while she is spending all her strength arguing for permission to own her own work. And here is the thing you have to hold about Porter, because the easy version of this story makes him a monster, and the true version is sadder than that. He was not wrong that he had made her. He had. He was not wrong that he loved the act they'd built together. He did. He simply could not tell the difference between loving the thing and owning it. And by the time he understood there was a difference, she was already gone. He had reached down and pulled a mountain girl up onto national television, and she had grown the way he'd wanted her to, and then she'd grown past him, which he had not wanted at all, and had never once imagined when he took the chance on her. The gift became the grievance. That happens to people. It is one of the oldest and most human ways. A good thing goes wrong. Here is the question that decided the rest of her life. When the person who made you becomes the person holding you down, and you owe them everything, and leaving will look like betrayal to the whole world watching, how do you go? Do you fight your way out? Do you sue? Do you scream? Dolly did none of those things. She wrote a song instead, and it is one of the most quietly devastating things anyone has ever done to a person they were leaving. In 1974, after 7 years, Dolly told Porter Wagoner she was leaving to go out on her own, and to say the things she could not say in a fight. She wrote him a song. She has said she wrote it about him, about the partnership, about the impossible tenderness of leaving someone who has meant everything and has to be left anyway. The song was, I Will Always Love You. Every word of it is a goodbye that refuses to be cruel. It says, I am going, and I will always love you, and I hope you find the thing you're looking for, and I am not taking anything from you but myself. She brought it to Porter and sang it to him in his office. And the story she tells is that this hard, controlling, proud man sat and listened to the most beautiful farewell ever written for him, and he cried. And then he told her that if she was going to leave, fine, but he would produce that song because it was too good to give to anyone else. Even in the moment of losing her, he wanted to own the sound of it. That is not a villain. That is a man who could feel exactly how much he was losing and still could not open his hand. Remember him this way because his ending matters. He would sue her not long after for around $3 million, claiming he had rights to her future earnings because of the contract that bound them, and the fight would drag on and hurt them both, and it would eventually settle for around $1 million. For years they did not speak, and then, decades later, they made their peace, and she performed with him again. And when he was dying in 2007, she was there at the end, at the bedside of the man who both built her cage and gave her the stage she used to escape it. She has never once let herself hate him. Hold on to that because it becomes a pattern. Dolly does not make villains out of the people who hurt her. She never has. She walked out of that partnership and into open air, and the rise that followed was the fastest and strangest of her life. But do not let the word open fool you into thinking it was easy or that she felt safe. Leaving Porter meant leaving the only platform she had, the television show, the machine that made her known, and stepping out with no guarantee that the audience would follow her instead of him. She was terrified. She had bet everything she'd built on the idea that she was bigger than the man who made her, and she would not know for months whether she was right or whether she'd just thrown away her whole career to prove a point. Out of that fear, and out of the strange, bright feeling of freedom underneath it, she wrote a song about coming through a long darkness and finally seeing the light break over the hills. She called it Light of a Clear Blue Morning. It is a song about survival, about knowing in your bones that the worst is behind you even before the proof arrives. Remember that title. Hold on to it. She wrote it as a frightened young woman gambling everything on herself, and she would sing it again, one more time, at the very far end of her story, when the gamble had long since paid off, and the losses had piled up, and the light was the only thing she had left to give. But that is the end. First came the winning. Free at last to be the whole self she'd been designing since the schoolroom. Dolly went bigger. The hair went higher. The clothes got tighter and brighter. She leaned all the way into the town tramp glamour she'd worshipped as a child. And she started reaching past country music toward the pop charts, toward the movies, toward the biggest audience in the world. And the country music establishment, the very world that had raised her, turned on her for it. They said she'd gone Hollywood. They said she'd sold out, gone commercial, abandoned real country music for glitter and crossover money. And underneath all of that, quieter and uglier, they said what the church ladies had said about the town tramp all those years before. They looked at the cleavage and the wigs and the makeup, and they called her cheap. They called her trashy. Some of them said it to her face, and most of them said it behind her back. And a woman who had spent her whole life terrified of being seen as unfinished, now had the whole industry pointing at her finished self and calling it too much. Watch how she answered, because it tells you everything. She did not tone it down. She did not apologize. She looked at the people calling her a joke, and she started making jokes first, before they could. Jokes about her own chest, and her own wigs and her own fakeness. She said it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. She said she wasn't offended by dumb blonde jokes because she knew she wasn't dumb, and she also knew she wasn't blonde. She took every weapon they were going to use on her and picked it up and made it hers, and she smiled the whole time, and the smiling was its own kind of armor. If you laugh at yourself first and loudest, nobody can hold you in the schoolroom and make you admit you have nothing on underneath. You've already told them, and you're rich. By the end of the 1970s, she had crossed over completely. The pop world took her. Her songs climbed charts that had nothing to do with country. And then Hollywood came calling, and the peak arrived. In 1980, she made her first movie, and it was a big one, 9 to 5. She played a secretary in a comedy about working women fighting a terrible boss, alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, and she was not supposed to be able to act, being a country singer with big hair, and she walked in and stole the entire picture. And then she wrote the theme song herself, and it went straight to #1. The movie was a hit. The song was a hit. A poor girl from a cabin with no electricity was now a movie star and a pop star, and a country legend all at once, and every color of that coat of many colors was finally shining exactly the way she'd promised herself it would. 2 years later, she made The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Burt Reynolds, and the rumors started about the two of them, and she was coy about it in the way she is always coy, saying things that could mean anything, protecting the private door even while she teased the public one. She was on top of the world. She had built the exact self she designed on the mountain, brick by rhinestone brick, and it had worked, and the whole world was looking at her, and no one was laughing. Go back to that first movie for a second, because the way she made it is the way she made everything. When they handed her the part in 9 to 5, the smart money in Hollywood assumed the country singer would freeze, that she'd need endless takes, that the big hair had no brain behind it. She had never acted a day in her life, so she did what she'd always done. She memorized every one of her own lines and everyone else's too, the whole script, all of it, because a poor girl who claws her way up does not walk into a room unprepared and give the doubters an opening. She has said she thought that was just how you did it, that you learned the whole thing. She stole the picture from 2 seasoned movie stars, because she had outworked everyone in the building before the cameras ever rolled. And the song, she wrote the theme to that movie sitting right there on the set. And when the beat came to her, she had no instrument, so she used her own long acrylic nails, clicking them together like a tiny typewriter. That hard, bright rhythm you can still hear at the front of the record. The fake nails wrote the hit. There is no better small picture of who she is. The very things people mocked her for, the nails, the hair, the fakeness, were the tools she used to beat them at their own game. She took the costume they laughed at and made it do the work. By then, the country establishment that once called her a sellout had gone quiet, because it is hard to keep calling a woman a traitor to country music, while she is the biggest star in the entire country, period. She had crossed every line they drew, and the audience had followed her over every one. She was a movie star and a chart topper and a household name, beloved by people who had never bought a country record in their lives, and by the mountain folks she came from all at once, every color of the coat shining. The girl in the schoolroom had won so completely that the win is almost hard to take in, and you were there for it, most of you. You remember the first time you saw her. Maybe it was on the variety shows, that high, sweet voice coming out of that tiny frame, all that hair, that laugh. Maybe it was in a darkened theater, watching her steal a movie out from under 2 bigger stars. Maybe your mother loved her, or your grandmother, or you were the one who loved her and had to defend her to people who only saw the wigs. She was on the television in the corner of the living room while dinner cooked. She was on the radio in the car. She became, without any of us quite deciding it, a familiar face in the family, someone you'd known so long you stopped counting the years. That is a rare thing, to belong to people that way, to be stitched into the ordinary evenings of millions of strangers, so completely that they feel they grew up with you. And that is exactly the feeling she engineered, on purpose, from a schoolroom, decades before any of you sat down to watch her. The warmth that made you feel she was practically kin was real, and it was also built. She wanted you to feel you knew her. She needed it, the way she'd needed the chickens and the pigs to hold still and listen when she was small. What none of you knew, what almost no one knew, was that the woman you felt so close to had drawn a line you would never cross, and had drawn it long ago and was keeping it, even as she smiled into your living room like an old friend. You knew her for 50 years. You never met her once, and it took a girl she'd known since before that girl was born to finally say so out loud. And that is exactly when it almost killed her. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about building a self out of armor. The armor works. It protects the soft thing inside, but it does not make the soft thing go away, and it does not let anyone reach in to help. And there comes a point where the woman inside the shining machine is drowning, and the machine keeps smiling because that is the only thing it knows how to do. The early 1980s should have been the happiest years of her life. Instead, they were the darkest. And this is the part of the story the public was never given. The part that got buried under the wigs and the jokes and the sparkle. The part that Miley Cyrus, decades later, would be one of the only people alive who understood. It started with her body giving out. She had been running at full speed for 15 years, writing, recording, touring, filming, building, never stopping, because a woman who came from nothing does not trust that the nothing won't come back if she rests. She had serious health trouble, gynecological problems that required surgery, and the surgery and the recovery pulled her off the road and out of the machine for the first time in her adult life. And when the machine stopped, the woman inside it had nowhere to hide. There was, in this same stretch, a heartbreak she has never fully explained and never will. She has called it an affair of the heart. She has been careful with the words always, choosing them the way she chooses everything, to tell the truth and protect the door at the same time. She has said it was an emotional attachment, a love that was not physical, and that when it ended, it broke something in her that had never broken before. She has never named the person outright. Reporters and biographers have long pointed to a man who worked closely with her in those years, a band leader and associate named Greg Perry, and she has neither confirmed it nor chased the guess away. And that ambiguity is itself the point. She will tell you she was destroyed. She will not tell you by whom. Everyone in and one door closed, and with her body wounded, and her heart wounded at the same time. The thing she had built to protect herself finally failed her, because armor cannot help you when the wound is on the inside. She stopped taking care of herself. She ate to numb it and the weight came on. And for a woman whose entire public self was built on a controlled and perfect body, the weight was its own private humiliation. She drank. She has said she thought about ending her life. She has told this story only a handful of times, and quietly, and it is not a story anyone should tell lightly. So here is only what she herself has said. She has said there was a gun in the nightstand by her bed. She has said she sat there one bad afternoon and looked at it and thought about picking it up. And she has said that in that exact moment her little dog, a white dog named Popeye, came running up the stairs and into the room, his nails clicking on the floor, and the small ordinary noise of him broke the spell. She took it as a sign. She has said she believed God sent that dog up those stairs at that exact second, and she chose to keep living, and she started slowly to climb back. Now hold this next thought, because it is the whole reason the Miley story matters. Not one person in the audience knew. During those years, when Dolly Parton was sitting alone, with a gun in the nightstand and a heart in pieces, the public was watching a bright, funny, sparkling woman on their television sets, telling jokes about her wigs, laughing that country laugh, letting everyone in. The armor never dropped. It could not drop. She had spent her whole life making sure that no matter what happened inside, the outside would stay finished and shining and undeniable. And so it did, right through the worst months of her life. The smile held while the woman behind it nearly went under. That is what it means to let everyone in and no one in. The public got the full warmth, the full performance every day, at the exact moment she had the least to give. And no one ever saw the cost, because the whole design of Dolly Parton is that no one ever sees the cost. The coat of many colors had become a suit of armor, and the armor had become so good that it could keep smiling while the person inside it was on the floor. She came back the way she came from everything, through work and faith, and the sheer refusal to be beaten that she'd carried down from the mountain. She leaned on her belief in God, which was real and is real and has nothing to do with performance. She let her family gather around her. She got up. The faith is worth stopping on, because it is the one part of Dolly Parton that never wears a wig. She was raised in it, in the shouting Pentecostal church of her grandfather, the preacher, and it went into her so early and so deep that it never became a costume, never became a brand, never became a thing she performs for the crowd. She has been careful, actually, to keep her faith personal in the same way she keeps her face personal. She does not use it to sell herself. She does not wield it against anyone. She talks about God the way a person talks about the ground they stand on, plainly, without decoration. And when the bottom fell out of her life, when the armor could not help her because the wound was inside it, faith was the thing she reached for. That had never needed the armor in the first place. She believed the dog on the stairs was sent. She believed she was meant to keep going. Whether or not you share the belief, watch what it did. It reached the woman the armor could not. It got underneath the wig and the paint, to the frightened person hiding there, and it lifted her up when nothing she had built could. Everything else about Dolly is constructed. That one thing she just believes. It may be the only door she leaves open, and she leaves it open only upward. And when she got up, she did the most Dolly thing imaginable. She turned the near-death into a building project. In 1986, she opened Dollywood. Think about the nerve of that. A woman who had just crawled out of the darkest stretch of her life, went back to the very mountains where she was born poor, to the county she came from, and she built a theme park with her own name on it and put thousands of her own people to work in a region that had never had enough jobs. She took the place that had laughed at her coat, and she planted an empire in it. She would say later that she wanted to bring money and pride back to the mountains. That raised her, and she did. But look at what it also was. It was a woman rebuilding her armor at the scale of a small city. If a wig and a painted face could protect the girl, a whole shining world with her name on the gate could protect the woman. She would never be poor again. She would never be laughed at again. She would never, ever be caught unfinished again. And the empire kept growing. There was the music, always the music, hit after hit, decade after decade. There was the business, sharper than anyone gave her credit for, because the dumb blonde jokes hid one of the most careful minds in the industry. When Whitney Houston recorded I Will Always Love You for a movie in 1992, the little farewell song Dolly had written for Porter Wagoner in his office, became the best-selling single by a woman in history. And because Dolly had held onto the rights, because the mountain girl who couldn't be fooled never let go of what was hers, it made her a fortune all over again. She has told the story of hearing Whitney's version for the first time on her car radio and being so overcome that she nearly drove off the road. Stop and give the business its due, because it is another kind of armor, and almost nobody saw it for what it was. The dumb blonde was a mask, and it was a mask she wore on purpose, because a woman that people underestimate can get away with murder in a boardroom. They saw the wig and the chest, and the giggle, and they thought soft, they thought simple, they thought they could take her, and every single one of them was wrong. Elvis Presley's people once wanted to record I Will Always Love You, and the deal came with a condition that she sign over half the publishing rights to the song. She loved Elvis. She cried over the offer, and she said no and walked away from Elvis Presley because she was not going to give away half of the things she'd written, not for anyone, not even for him. That decision looked like a mountain woman being stubborn. It was actually one of the smartest business moves in the history of American music, because she kept the whole song. And when Whitney's version came along, it made her richer than any single record ever could have, and every dollar of it was hers. The girl in the schoolroom who couldn't be fooled had grown into a woman who owned her own work down to the last note, in an industry built on taking that ownership away from women exactly like her. She let them think. She was a dumb blonde. She counted the money. That was armor too, the most useful kind. She kept warm partnerships too, real ones, the kind this audience remembers with a smile, and even those obeyed the same rule. There was Kenny Rogers, her partner on Islands in the Stream, that easy sunlit duet from 1983 that a whole generation danced to at weddings. On stage, the two of them had a chemistry so natural that people spent years insisting there had to be a romance under it. There wasn't. She has said Kenny was like a brother to her, that the love was real and the romance was invented, and she stayed close to him for the rest of his life, right up until he died. And that is the pattern one more time, in one more beloved face. She gave the audience the warmth, the sparkle, the sense that she and Kenny might just be sweethearts, because the warmth was true, and the audience loved it. And she kept the actual private truth of it, brother and sister, exactly where it belonged, on her own side of the door. Every relationship in her life ran that way. The world got the feeling. She kept the fact. Keep that image. A song about leaving, coming back on the radio, almost sending her into a ditch. It will happen again, years later, with a different song and a different young woman, because the same year Whitney's version was topping the charts, and the same year Dolly nearly wrecked her car listening to her own farewell. A baby was being born to a country singer Dolly had recently taken under her wing, and that baby, in time, would grow up to be the person who finally told the world the truth Dolly had spent her whole life keeping. Her name was Destiny Hope Cyrus. The world would come to call her Miley, to understand how a mountain legend, born in 1946, ended up as the fairy godmother of a pop star. Born in 1992, you have to meet the man in the middle. His name was Billy Ray Cyrus, and in the early 1990s, he came out of Kentucky like a rocket. Place him in his moment. He was a good-looking country singer with a mullet and a song called Achy Breaky Heart. And in 1992, that song did not just become a hit, it became a phenomenon, a line dance that swept through every honky-tonk, and wedding reception in America. Billy Ray went from living out of his car to selling millions of records almost overnight. And when a new star that big comes up in country music, the way you get taught how to carry it is by putting you on the road with someone who has already carried it for 30 years. So Billy Ray Cyrus began opening shows for Dolly Parton. They were the same kind of animal, both country kids from poor southern hollers, her from Tennessee and him from Kentucky, both of them raised on hard work and gospel and the sense that the fame could vanish as fast as it came. She sent a note to his dressing room. They became friends fast, the way people do when they recognize their own childhood in someone else's face. And then the tabloids did what tabloids do, and it turned into the moment that tells you exactly who Dolly is. A supermarket paper ran a story hinting that Dolly and Billy Ray were having an affair. It was not true. She was married to Carl Dean and had been for decades, and Billy Ray was a young married man, and there was nothing between them but friendship. But the story embarrassed him, and he felt terrible about it, and so he did the decent thing. He went to her dressing room before a show, and he put the paper down in front of her to apologize, mortified, expecting her to be hurt or angry. Dolly looked at the story, then she looked at him, and she said, in that sweet, even voice, that this kind of thing sells records, honey. Some tellings have her winking. She was not upset in the slightest. She had lived through every rumor there was. The fake husband, the affairs, the surgeries, the whispers about her private life. And she had learned a long time ago that the machine that hurt you was the same machine that fed you, and that you could either let it eat you or you could learn to ride it. She rode it. And Billy Ray, who had braced himself for a scolding, found instead a woman who had already made peace with the entire circus, and he loved her for it, and the friendship deepened into something like family. She cast him not long after, in the video for one of her own songs, a playful number called Romeo, where he got to be the handsome heartthrob. The women all swooned over. It was a light thing, a joke, but it sealed them. And when Billy Ray and his wife were expecting a baby in 1992, in the middle of all that noise and success, he asked Dolly Parton to be the child's godmother. She said yes, but she said it in her own careful way, and the way she said it is a small window into her whole self. She told him she'd be the baby's fairy godmother, not the regular kind, because a regular godmother is supposed to do certain duties and be there in certain ways, and she wasn't sure her life could promise all of that. A fairy godmother is something else. A fairy godmother shows up out of nowhere when you need her most, works a little magic, tells you the truth, and disappears back into her own strange, bright life. She knew exactly what she could give and exactly what she couldn't, and she named it honestly right at the start. And that too is the discipline of a woman who guards her doors. She would not promise more than she could keep. She would keep everything she promised. The baby was born on November 23, 1992, and they named her Destiny Hope because her father believed her destiny was to bring hope. They called her Smiley because she smiled all the time, and Smiley became Miley, and the name stuck. And Dolly Parton, who has said she has known this child since before she was even born, looked at the baby and said there was something in her, a light, a sparkle, a sense of wonder, and that she was special from the very first. Now you can hear that as the kind of sweet thing every godmother says. But keep watching, because Dolly meant something specific, and it would take 20 years to fully show itself. She saw in that baby the same thing she'd had in the schoolroom, the hunger to be looked at, the talent that was too big for the room it was born in, the particular danger of a child who needs the whole world's eyes and is going to get them. She had built her entire life around surviving exactly that. And here was a little girl who was going to have to survive it too, only faster and younger and louder, in a world with cameras in every hand. The fairy godmother had been assigned to the one child on Earth who was going to need her armor most. The question was whether the child would take it, and the first answer came from a television show that turned a little girl into the biggest child star on the planet and nearly broke her in half doing it. In 2006, the Disney Channel put a 14-year-old Miley Cyrus at the center of a show called Hannah Montana, and the idea of that show is so close to the secret of Dolly Parton's whole life that it is almost hard to believe nobody said it out loud at the time. The premise was this: An ordinary teenage girl named Miley Stewart lives a normal life. At school by day, with normal friends and normal problems and a normal face. And then she puts on a blonde wig and becomes Hannah Montana, a world-famous pop star. And no one recognizes the girl underneath the wig. 2 lives, one face for the world, and one face for herself, and a wig that stands between them like a wall. The show was a comedy about a child managing the exact split that Dolly Parton had been living, in earnest, for 40 years. And Disney, in a stroke of casting that was either genius or accident, brought the real Dolly Parton onto the show to play Aunt Dolly. She appeared as herself, more or less, a glamorous, wise, big-haired aunt figure who breezed in to give the girl advice. On screen, she was playing a version of exactly what she already was off-screen, the fairy godmother, dropping in with a little magic and a hard truth, then floating back out. Miley has said that as far as she was concerned, Aunt Dolly on the show was just her real Aunt Dolly, and that the line between the two barely existed. But the detail that matters most, the one Miley has told over and over, because she never got over it, is what the table reads looked like. Picture it. A table read is the unglamorous part of making television. Everyone sitting around. A table in a plain room, reading the script out loud before they film. And Miley, a teenager, would show up to those the way teenagers show up, to anything in her pajamas, with zit cream dotted on her face, hair a mess, no makeup, completely undone because it was 7 in the morning, and it was just work and no cameras were rolling. And Dolly Parton would arrive, in full drag, full hair, full face, full rhinestones, perfect for a table read. At 7 in the morning, in a plain room with no cameras, sitting next to a teenager in zit cream, Dolly Parton was already finished, already the complete public creation, already armored head to toe. And a teenage Miley Cyrus sat there in her pajamas and watched this, and something went into her that she would spend the next 20 years understanding, because she was living the split on television as a joke, a fun premise, a wig you put on and take off. And sitting 3 feet away was a woman living the split for real, a woman who did not take the wig off, a woman for whom there was no scene, where Hannah becomes Miley again and washes her face and goes back to being ordinary. Dolly never became ordinary. Dolly was always in the wig. Miley would say it years later, almost stunned by it. The show was pretend. Her godmother was doing it for real, and had been her whole life. They performed together around this time too. At Dollywood at the Park's 25th anniversary, the two of them sang Jolene, Dolly's own song, about a beautiful woman who could steal your man, a song she'd written decades earlier partly out of her own quiet jealousy over a red-haired bank teller who used to flirt with Carl, a grown legend and her teenage goddaughter, trading lines on a mountain stage, in the very hills where Dolly was born poor, and where the theme park now stood as proof that she never would be again. It should have been the happy middle of the story. In a lot of ways it was, but the show that made Miley Cyrus one of the most famous children on earth was also building the same cage around her that Porter Wagoner had once built around Dolly, and the girl inside it was starting to feel the walls exactly the way her godmother had felt them in 1974, because Hannah Montana was a machine, and machines do not like to let go of gold. Millions of children loved Hannah. Disney had built an empire on her, and the world that loved that wholesome, sparkly, wig-wearing pop princess did not want the real girl underneath to grow up, to change, to become something the machine hadn't approved. They wanted Hannah forever, and Miley, like Dolly before her, began to understand that the thing that made her could also trap her, and that being adored as a character is a very lonely thing when you need to be seen as a person. And it was not one big moment that built that trap. It was 1,000 small ones, and Dolly watched most of them from close range, the way a fairy godmother watches, unable to stop any of it, only able to be there for the fallout. She watched the world refuse to let the girl grow up. Every time Miley did anything that wasn't sweet and wholesome, and 10 years old, the sky fell. There were leaked private photos when she was still a child, an invasion nobody had any right to. There was a magazine picture of her at 15, artful and covered but bare-shouldered, that set off a national scandal and forced a 15-year-old to apologize for a photographer's choices. There was a performance on an awards show that got called Too Grown Up, and a video of her being a normal, reckless teenager that cost her a business deal. And on, a young person living every ordinary mistake of growing up, under a spotlight hot enough to burn, while the machine that made money off her innocence punished her every time she tried to become something else. Dolly knew that trap in her body, because she had been the one they wanted to stay small too. The girl singer on Porter's show who was supposed to be grateful and stay put. She had felt the smothering, so when she looked at Miley, in those years she did not see a bad girl gone wild, the way the tabloids did. She saw a young person being crushed by the exact thing that had almost crushed her, only faster and younger, and with cameras in every hand. And she understood before almost anyone that a person pushed hard enough into a corner will eventually do something drastic to get out, because she had wanted to do something drastic too, and had in her quieter way. In 1974, with a song and a resignation, Miley did not have a Porter to write a farewell to. Miley had a whole culture holding her in the schoolhouse, and to break its grip she was going to have to do something no goodbye song could do. She would later describe the feeling with a line so violent it stopped people cold. And the only person she said it to first, before she said it to the world, was the one woman on earth who had lived through the exact same trap and gotten out. She said it to Dolly, the line Miley used, and that Dolly repeated later because it landed so hard, was this. She said she needed to murder Hannah Montana in order for people to accept who she really was. Murder, not retire, not outgrow, not move on, kill. She felt she had to destroy the sweet wig wearing child the whole world loved, publicly and violently, because as long as Hannah was alive people would never let Miley exist. Dolly understood that sentence in her bones. She had lived a softer version of it in 1974, when she had to leave the man who made her, and the world called it betrayal. She knew what it was to be loved as a thing you'd outgrown. She knew that sometimes the only way out of the cage is to burn it down in front of everyone and take the blame. So when Miley did it, and she did it as loud and as hard as anyone in the history of pop music, Dolly did two things at once, and the two things together are the clearest picture we have of how she loves. In private, she was terrified. She has said so plainly. She said she was very worried that she was holding her breath, hoping the public wouldn't crucify the girl. This was 2013, the year of the album called Bangers, the year of the video where Miley swung naked on a wrecking ball, the year of the performance at the awards show where she stuck out her tongue and twerked in a flesh-colored costume and turned herself overnight into the most talked about and most attacked young woman in America. The backlash was enormous and it was cruel. People called her disgusting, a disgrace, a lost girl, a bad influence. Her own siblings were humiliated at school. She would say later that she felt like maybe the first person ever to be canceled, and her godmother, watching from the outside, was scared to death because Dolly of all people knew exactly how far a public can turn on a woman it decides has shown too much. And she had good reason to be afraid because she had seen exactly how this machine works from the inside. Decades before, she had lived the softer version of it under Porter Wagoner, a talented young woman handed to a man and a system that wanted to use her up and own the profit and decide who she got to be. She knew the machine did not love the girl. It loved what the girl could generate, and when a young woman gave it everything, the way Miley was giving it everything, the machine would happily take the body and the shock and the headlines and leave the actual talent to drown, because talent is slow money and scandal is fast. That fear was not abstract. In the middle of the storm, another singer, Sinead O'Connor, wrote Miley an open letter. Out of what she said was real concern, warning her that the industry was using her, that they would happily let her be exploited and then discard her, that her real gift would be buried under the spectacle. It turned into a painful public fight between the two of them, and there was cruelty in it on more than one side. And Sinead herself was a woman who had been chewed up by that same machine and never fully recovered. From it, it was a hard, sad episode all around. But strip away the fight and the warning underneath, it was the very thing Dolly feared in her own chest, that the noise would swallow the girl, that the world would remember the twerking and forget that the child could sing and write and think, that Miley would win the war to escape Hannah Montana and lose herself in the winning. That is why Dolly's defense mattered so much, and why it took the exact shape it did. But Dolly did not say any of that fear in public. In public, she did the other thing. She defended her completely, and she did it in a way only Dolly could. She said that if she didn't know how smart and talented Miley was, she might worry about her, but she'd watched that girl grow up, so she didn't. She said Miley had been proud of her work as Hannah, but that people were going to leave her there forever, and that she was smothering and choking in it. Smothering and choking. That is a woman who remembers the feeling firsthand. She said Miley had to do something completely drastic, and she did. And she made her point, and she made her mark, and more power to her. She wrote that in a national magazine, in a tribute naming Miley, one of the most influential people in the world. And she signed her own philosophy. At the bottom of it, she said, "I did it my way, so why can't she do it her way?" And then, because Dolly never gives a blessing without also giving the truth, she added the other half. She said she hoped that now Miley could relax and show people how talented she really was, because the girl could write, and the girl could sing, and the girl was smart, and she didn't have to be so drastic. She would respect her choices, but she wanted her to know that the shock wasn't the point. The shock was just the door. The talent was the room. That is the whole art of how Dolly loves someone. She will stand between you and the entire angry world and take their swings for you in public, without hesitation. And she will also, quietly, tell you the one hard thing your friends are too scared to say. She defended Miley's right to burn it all down, and told her she didn't need to burn quite that much, both at once, everyone in and one door, of pure honesty that only family gets to walk through. She had defended her before too, back when Miley was still on Disney, and a performance drew criticism and reporters wanted Dolly to scold her. Dolly refused. She said if they thought she was going to sit there and pass judgment on Miley, they were wrong, that she thought the girl was beautiful and she loved her, and she was just trying to grow up. And then she said something so purely Dolly that it diffused the whole thing. She reminded them that she remembered being young and full of feeling herself, and that she still was, and she laughed. And the trap of the question fell apart in her hands. She would not be used as a weapon against her own goddaughter, not by anyone, not ever. And she understood the attack better than the attackers did, because it was the same attack she'd survived. When the world called Miley trashy, Dolly heard the exact word they'd once thrown at her, the word the church ladies had used about the town tramp she'd worshipped as a child. She had been called trashy for showing cleavage, for dressing sexy, for being too much, and she'd carried it and turned it into a joke and survived it. And now she watched them do it to the child she'd promised to protect. She has said she went through the same thing, and that she loved that girl. She wasn't defending a stranger's choices. She was defending her own life, one more time in someone else's body. There is one more piece of this, and it closes the circle back to a moment we already saw. When Dolly first heard Wrecking Ball, the song, not the scandal she was driving, and it hit her the way Whitney's voice had hit her all those years before. So hard, she has said, she almost wrecked the car and almost wept in it, thinking, how great can a song be? How great can this girl be? Twice in her life, a song about heartbreak came over the radio and nearly put Dolly Parton in a ditch. The first was her own farewell, sung by Whitney. The second was her goddaughter, screaming her pain to the whole world. She heard the talent under the twerking. She always heard the room behind the door. That was her gift, and it was the thing the pylon could never see. Years later, she'd record her own version of Wrecking Ball with Miley, take the song that got the girl crucified, and sing it beside her, an old woman and a young one turning a scandal into a duet. And it was more than one duet over the years. They kept finding their way back to each other in music, the way family does. Dolly co-wrote a song called Rainbowland with Miley for one of her albums, a hopeful, open-hearted thing about a world where everyone belongs. And Miley has said that having Dolly as a co-writer taught her more than she could put into words. Then on a New Year's Eve special, ringing in a new year in front of the whole country, the two of them stood together and sang a medley that closes a circle so cleanly it is hard to believe it happened by accident. They sang Miley's Wrecking Ball and Dolly's I Will Always Love You, braided together. Sit with that pairing for a second, because you know what both of those songs are now. I Will Always Love You is the farewell a young Dolly wrote to escape the man who caged her. Wrecking Ball is the scream a young Miley used to escape the character who caged her. Two women, two generations. Two songs about breaking free of the thing that made you, sung by the two women who wrote them, standing side by side. Miley has said she cried during the rehearsals. Of course she did. She was singing her own escape, next to the woman whose escape had shown her it was possible. And both songs had come out of the same wound, worn in different decades. But that was later. First, the girl had to survive being 20 and hated, and grow into the woman who could finally understand what her godmother had been trying to show her all along, about the difference between the armor and the face. The lesson finally landed at the Grammys in 2024, and it landed because Miley almost didn't show up. By then she was a grown woman who had lived through the fire and come out the other side, exactly the way Dolly had prayed she would. She had a song called Flowers, a quiet anthem about learning to love herself after a marriage ended, and it had become one of the biggest hits in the world. The Grammys wanted her to perform it, and Miley, who had spent years learning to protect herself by staying home, by pulling back from the giant stages that had once nearly swallowed her, hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to stand up in front of all of them again, so she called Dolly. She has described it as one of their tough conversations. And Dolly's answer was not gentle, and it was not vague. Of course you're doing the Grammys, she told her, and you're not just going to show up, you're going to show off, be everything you are. And then she said the thing that unlocked it, the sentence that is really the key to this whole story. She told her not to forget the beauty, the hair, the makeup, the whole show, because Dolly said it's armor for us. Armor. She used the word herself. She named the thing she had spent 60 years never explaining, and she handed it to her goddaughter like a family heirloom. The wig is not vanity. The paint is not vanity. The rhinestones are not a costume you hide behind, because you're ashamed of the person underneath. They are armor. They are the thing a girl who came from nothing puts on, so that when she walks out in front of the world that once laughed at her coat, she is already finished, already undeniable, already safe. You do not go into battle bare. You put on the armor, and then you can afford to open your whole heart, because the soft part is protected. Miley has been careful to explain that Dolly was not telling her to become a copy of Dolly. She wasn't saying wear my wig, be my kind of glamorous. She was saying find your own armor and put it on, and go be completely yourself inside it. And Miley did. She stood up at the Grammys fully herself, and she performed Flowers. And that night, she won the first Grammys of her entire life. The girl who had to murder Hannah Montana to be allowed to exist stood on the biggest stage there is, protected by her godmother's oldest secret, and finally got to be seen as what she'd been all along, the room behind the door. Dolly watched it happen, and she did not need any credit for it, and that too is the point. The armor she'd handed down did its work in the dark, the way it always had, quietly, protecting the soft, real thing so it could finally be seen. Miley won. Dolly smiled from wherever she was watching, and the oldest secret of a mountain girl, who was once laughed at for having nothing, had just carried a second frightened, gifted young woman safely across the biggest stage there is. That is what an inheritance actually is. Not money, not a name. A way of surviving handed to someone you love. That keeps working long after the person who invented it has stepped out of the light. This is the philosophy Dolly gave her, again and again, in a sentence Miley now repeats to everyone she meets. You do you, I'll do me, and together we'll be us. Say it slowly, because it is the opposite of what a mentor usually offers. Dolly never tried to turn Miley into a small copy of herself. She has said flat out that she doesn't believe in giving people advice, that it isn't right to tell somebody how to live their life, that all any of us can do is share what we know and kick a few rocks out of the road for each other. You do you, not you do me. She had spent her whole life fighting to be her own undeniable self, and she was never going to take that away from the child she loved. She'd hand her the armor. She'd never hand her a mask of Dolly's face. There is a beautiful contradiction sitting right in the middle of this, and Dolly holds both halves of it without any trouble. On the hair she gasped and said, you are me, a blonde, a bright one, do not you dare go dim. On the life she said the exact opposite, you do you, walk your own road, I would never tell you how to live it. Line those two up and they look like they cancel out. They don't. What she meant by "you are me" was never be a copy of my choices. It was keep your light. She saw in Miley the same fire she'd carried down the mountain. The same hunger to be looked at that had driven her since the schoolroom. And when she said "you are me," she was really saying, "I recognize you. I know what that fire costs, and I know what it's worth. Do not let anyone talk you into putting it out." And what she meant by "you to you" was everything else. The songs, the road, the loves, the mistakes, the reinventions, all of it yours to get wrong and yours to get right. Protect the fire, she was saying. Spend it however you want. That is not a contradiction. That is exactly what a good mother tells a gifted, headstrong child. And it is the closest thing to a philosophy of raising someone that Dolly Parton ever put into words. She gave her other things too, practical things. The kind of hard mountain wisdom that has nothing to do with rhinestones. She taught her that if you want something to happen, you should promote it before it exists. Announce it into the world so loudly that no one can say no, so that the thing has to become real just to catch up to the promise. Miley has called it a terrible habit, and also some of the best advice she ever got, and she used it, teasing a project that didn't exist yet until the excitement forced it into being. That is not the wisdom of a dumb blonde. That is the wisdom of a woman who has been building empires out of pure nerve since she was a teenager with a cardboard suitcase. There is a story about songwriting that shows the same thing. Miley went to visit her and played her a new song, and Dolly listened and then asked her plainly, "Got any hits?" Not "That's lovely, dear." Got any hits? Miley named a couple of titles for songs she hadn't actually finished yet, and Dolly praised the titles. And now Miley was on the hook, because she'd promised Dolly songs that didn't exist. And so she went home and finished them just to be able to hand them over. She has said Dolly practically magicked those songs into being, just by asking the hard question and expecting a real answer. The fairy godmother again. A little magic, a hard truth, and then she's gone. And underneath all the craft and all the strategy, there was the thing Miley says she learned most, which had nothing to do with fame at all. She has said Dolly taught her how to treat people, that Dolly always says hello to the person at the very bottom of the call sheet, the ones nobody notices, the crew and the assistants and the people holding the doors, that watching Dolly treat everyone with the same warmth, no matter how small their job, was a constant reminder to her whole family of what actually matters, and that you should never let success change your heart. The most famous woman in the room, still making sure the least famous person in it felt seen, because she remembered being that person. She remembered being the poorest child in the schoolroom. She was never going to walk past someone the way she'd once been walked past. There was even a moment, small and funny and telling, when Miley thought about dyeing her hair brown, and Dolly, Miley says, clutched her pearls and gasped like Miley had said something dangerous, and told her she could not possibly do that because Dolly said, "You are me." A blonde, a bright one. Miley says she'd never seen Dolly more scared. It's a joke, and Dolly meant it as one. But listen to it again. "You are me." The godmother saw her own light in the girl, the same hunger, the same sparkle, the same need to shine so bright the world can't look away. And the thought of that light going dim, going ordinary, going quiet, genuinely frightened her. Not because she wanted a copy, because she knew what that light had cost her to protect, and she couldn't stand to watch the girl put it out. All of this was Miley learning the armor from the inside, and the more she understood it, the closer she got to being able to say the thing about Dolly that no one else could say. Because you cannot describe the armor from the outside. From the outside, it just looks like a lot of hair and a lot of makeup and a woman who tries too hard. Only someone who has been handed the armor and told what it's for and watched the person who invented it wear it in a plain room at 7 in the morning can tell you what it really is. And so at last Miley did. In 2024, on the cover of a magazine, Miley Cyrus said the sentence this whole story has been walking toward. She said that Dolly lets everyone in and no one in at the same time, that everyone feels like they know her, and that everyone is okay with the fact that they will never see her without the makeup, without the full drag. Now you have everything you need to understand what she meant, because you've seen where it came from. Let everyone in and no one in. She gives the public the warmest, most open, most generous self in show business. She hugs strangers, she cries with fans, she answers letters. She remembers the person at the bottom of the call sheet. There is nothing cold about the public Dolly, nothing withholding, nothing fake in the warmth. The love is real. And behind all that real love is a single door that has never opened. Not for the press, not for the fans, not for the biographers. And the door is very small and very specific. It is her face without the paint. She sleeps in her makeup. That is not a rumor. She has said it herself many times. She goes to bed camera ready because she wants to be prepared for anything. A fire, an earthquake, a tornado, a call in the night, an unexpected visitor at the door, her husband needing her. She has said the only times the public will ever see her without her makeup are in death, or in a true life or death emergency. And she means both of those literally. She built a face, and then she decided the world would only ever be allowed to see the finished version of it. Even in her sleep, even alone in her own house, the armor stays on, the wig stays on too. She started wearing them decades ago, after years of bleaching and teasing had wrecked her real hair, and she has joked that she owns 365 of them, one for every day of the year. Her actual hair, the sandy blonde underneath, is fine and healthy precisely because she almost never lets the public see it, or the abuse it would take to make it match the towering public style. She has shared once or twice an old picture of her real hair, captioned to tell people, yes, that's really mine. But she never made it the everyday version. The everyday version, the one the whole world knows, is the wig. Always the wig. Miley said it exactly right. She is always in the wig. And it isn't about the effort of building a character anymore, because the character is not a thing she creates fresh each morning. It is simply who she is when she is seen. There is no version of Dolly Parton that the public gets to meet, who is not already Dolly Parton complete. And she does nearly all of it herself, which is the part that surprises people most. She paints her own face. Not a team of artists, not a Hollywood glam squad hovering with brushes. Dolly. The people who have worked with her for years say the professionals rarely improve on the version she creates, because no one knows the canvas the way she does. And she has been painting it since she was a poor teenager who couldn't afford much and figured out how to do a lot with a little. She can put the whole face on in 15 or 20 minutes. She mixes drugstore staples with the fancy stuff. The same cheap remover pads and petroleum jelly a country woman keeps in a bathroom drawer, right alongside the expensive things, because the point was never the price. The point was the control. She learned to make herself beautiful with whatever was in reach, and she never handed that power to anyone else, because it was the one power she'd built from scratch. The wig she trusts to a small handful of specialists who have made them for her over the decades. Gravity-defying towers of hair that let her walk out finished on the worst morning of her life. But the face is hers, applied by her own hand, every single day before anyone sees her. Once in a grate while someone gets a glimpse. A television presenter in Britain once found herself in a dressing room with Dolly at an unguarded moment, and got closer to the bare truth than most people ever will. And the report was always the same as every report from the rare few who have seen behind it. Still striking, still composed, still, somehow, herself. The armor is not there to hide something monstrous. There is nothing monstrous. It is there because she decided, and the deciding is the whole thing. Under the custom clothes, there are more private things still. There are tattoos, pastel ones, ribbons and butterflies and flowers, and a delicate design of a beehive. And she has said the tattoos exist mostly to cover scars. The purple keloid scars her fair skin makes, including a mark left by a feeding tube during a hard stretch of illness. She has shown them to only a tiny handful of people in her life. There are the results of the surgeries she has been honest about, the little nips and tucks she jokes about with that line about how if something is sagging or dragging, she'll tuck it or pluck it. All of it done carefully, in small amounts, to maintain the deliberately artificial ideal she designed as a child. Not to look young, but to look like the best possible Dolly. The clothes cover all of it. The long sleeves, the high necks, the gloves, the layers. She likes the covered, polished look. She also uses it to keep the private map of her own body private. Even the body is a door, and the clothes themselves are their own quiet proof of how far the control runs. She does not shop. A team designs original looks for her, hundreds of them a year, And in the busy stretches, a new dress can come into being nearly every day, each one made for her small frame, some sewn right onto her so the fit is exact, all of it kept in a warehouse the size of a small store. Even at home, she does not slip into sweatpants. She favors what she has called her baby clothes, comfortable but still finished, still a softer version of the look, because there is no off switch, and there never was. Most of us have a public self we assemble in the morning, and a private self we collapse into at night. Dolly built a life with almost no gap between the two, where even rest is done in a polished version of the costume, where the woman who takes the wig off at night is still living inside the world the wig created. It sounds exhausting. To her, it is simply home. She has been finished for so long that finished is the only comfortable way to be. So here at last is the truth Miley revealed, laid all the way open. The public Dolly Parton is not a lie. That is the thing the scandal hunters could never accept. The reason they kept digging for a hidden sin, and kept coming up with cornbread and a devoted husband, and a coat made of rags. They assumed that a woman this constructed, this controlled, this armored, must be hiding something rotten under all that shine. She isn't. What she is hiding is much simpler and much more human than that. She is hiding the unfinished version of herself. The bare face, the plain hair, the ordinary body, the woman who exists in the seconds before the armor goes on. That is the secret. That is the whole of it. There is no monster behind the wig. There is just a person. And she decided, a very long time ago, that the person would be hers alone. And she made that decision in a schoolroom in the Smoky Mountains, with a coat made of rags, and a ring of children laughing that she had nothing on underneath. That is why the door is exactly where it is. Everything Miley described. The makeup she sleeps in, the wig she is never without, the face the public will only see in death. All of it traces straight back to a little girl who was held down and mocked for being poor and unfinished, and who swore, with the whole force of a child's wounded pride, that no one would ever catch her that way again. She would let the world have everything. Her voice, her songs, her warmth, her time, her money, her whole enormous heart. She would give and give and give, more generously than almost any famous person alive. And she would keep one thing back, the one thing they tried to take from her when she was small. She would never again let anyone see her unfinished. Let everyone in, keep no one in. It isn't a contradiction once you know the child. It's the most consistent decision anyone ever made. But there was one person who got the whole thing. One person who saw the bare face and the plain hair, and the woman in the seconds before the armor goes on, every day, for nearly 60 years. And to understand the full weight of what Dolly kept private, you have to understand what it cost her to lose. The only person she ever let all the way in. Carl Dean saw her without any of it. He was there in the mornings before the wig went on and the face got painted. He was there at night when it came off. In whatever quiet way it came off behind a closed bedroom door in a house nobody photographed. The woman the entire world would only ever meet finished, complete, armored, was, to one silent man in Tennessee, just his wife. Bare, ordinary, home. He is the only person who can honestly say he knew what she looked like at the bottom of the story. And he never told a soul, because he never told anyone anything, because that was the whole gift of him. Their marriage was not a normal one, and they both knew it, and they built it to fit them instead of pretending it fit anyone else. She was gone constantly, on the road, on stages, in front of millions. He stayed home and ran his paving business, and drove his truck and lived his quiet life. And he did not resent her fame, and he did not want any of it for himself. They had a rule between them that most people would find strange, and that worked for them completely. They allowed for crushes. They allowed for flirting. Dolly has said in her open way that she and Carl gave each other room to have feelings, little sparks, harmless attractions, as long as they always came home to each other, and as long as nothing crossed the line into a physical affair. She has said there were flirtations and there were crushes, and there was never on either side the thing that actually breaks a marriage. The proof of that arrangement is one of her most famous songs, and most people who sing along to it have no idea it is really about a bank teller. There was a red-haired woman who worked at the bank the Deans used, and she used to flirt with Carl openly, and Dolly noticed, and Dolly got jealous, And out of that small, ordinary sting of jealousy she wrote Jolene, a song begging a beautiful woman not to take her man just because she could. She has told the story with a laugh, said she and Carl even had it out over it, said nothing ever happened, but that the fear of it, the sheer power that other woman's beauty seemed to have, went straight into a song that has outlived almost everything else in country music. The whole world's favorite song about jealousy came from a mountain woman watching a bank teller smile at her quiet husband. When people pushed her about affairs, about Burt Reynolds, about anyone, she gave them the same answer she gives about everything private, the answer that shuts the door with a smile. She would say, maybe I did, and maybe I didn't, and it's none of your damn business. Coy about Burt, calling whatever happened sweeter than a love affair, which could mean everything or nothing, never confirming, never denying, always leaving the door shut and the visitor charmed, because the private life belonged to her, and Carl and no one else, and she was not going to hand it over just because a reporter asked nicely or asked rudely. Everyone in. That one door closed, and in 2025, after nearly 60 years, Carl Dean died. He was 82, the man who almost no one had ever seen, the husband the tabloids once swore was made up, the one person alive who knew. What Dolly Parton looked like with nothing on her face was gone, and the woman who had spent her whole life keeping one door closed to the world now had no one left standing on the other side of it. Think about what that loss actually is. For a person built the way she is built, the rest of us grieve out loud. We fall apart in front of our families, our friends, our coworkers, and being seen falling apart is part of how we heal. Dolly does not have that, not really, not in the way we do, because she decided a long time ago that the world would only ever see her finished. So she lost the one man who had ever seen her unfinished, and she had to grieve him the way she does everything else that is real and private, behind the door, in her own house, with her faith which is real and her family which is close, and none of it for cameras. She kept the armor on for the public even in that, because keeping the armor on is not something she does to fool anyone. It is who she became at 7 years old. And you do not stop being who you are because your heart is broken. If anything, you hold it tighter, the way she held onto everything through every dark stretch of her life. Because the armor is the thing that has never once failed her, even when everything inside it did. The girl who swore no one would ever see her unfinished had kept that vow so completely that when the only witness to her real face was taken from her, the vow simply held, the way it held through the gun in the nightstand, the way it held through every rumor and every attack and every loss. The face stayed finished, the door stayed closed, and the world, letting everyone in and no one in, never saw her cry. Carl was the deepest door, but he was not the only one. There is another person Dolly has kept close and kept private for even longer, and the way she has protected that friendship tells you the same thing about her from a different angle. Her name is Judy Ogle, and Dolly met her when they were children, 2 little girls in the same poor Tennessee schools, and they have been best friends ever since, for the better part of 80 years. Judy traveled with her, worked for her, sat beside her through decades of the strange floating life of fame. And because Dolly's husband was almost never seen, and because the 2 women were so constantly and completely together, people did what people do. They whispered. They decided the closeness must be a secret romance, that Dolly must be gay, that Judy was the real relationship and Carl the cover story. Dolly has answered this the way she answers everything, with warmth and with a closed door. She has said Judy is a sister to her, a soulmate in the plain old friendship sense, the person who has known her longest and best, and that the rumors were unfair, mostly because of how much they embarrassed Judy and Judy's family, who did not sign up for the spotlight the way Dolly did. She has said plainly that she is not gay, while being, for decades, one of the loudest and most loyal friends the gay community ever had in country music, a woman who loved her drag queen impersonators and defended her gay fans, and never once traded their loyalty for the approval of the people who would have preferred she stay quiet. She refused to be ashamed of the friendship, and she refused to let the world turn it into something it wasn't. Both at once, she would protect Judy's privacy and her own, and she would not apologize for a love that was exactly what she said it was. You start to see the shape of her whole life in this. Carl private, Judy private, the affair of the heart private, unnamed to this day, the bare face private, the real hair private, the tattoos private, shown to almost no one. Over and over across 60 years, the same discipline. Give the world the warmth and the songs, and the jokes, and the endless open heart, and keep the small handful of most personal things locked away, where the machine cannot reach them. She learned early that the machine would take anything you let it have, that it would turn your husband into a rumor, and your best friend into a scandal, and your painted face into a punchline. And she decided the only way to survive it was to choose herself. Exactly what it got. She would not let it choose for her. Not ever again, not since the schoolroom. And every so often, the gap between the woman and the image she'd built got so wide that even she could fall into it. Which brings us to the funniest and saddest little story in her whole life. Dolly Parton once entered a Dolly Parton lookalike contest. In disguise, she'd heard about these contests. Drag queens and fans dressing up as her, piling the hair high and painting the face and squeezing into the rhinestones, competing to be the most Dolly of all the Dollies. And the real one, the original, decided to enter one herself, hidden just to see. She exaggerated her own look, made herself a caricature of her own caricature, and walked out onto that stage as one contestant among many pretending to be her. She lost. She did not even place. The judges looked at the real Dolly Parton and at a lineup of impersonators and decided somebody else did Dolly better. And she has told this story as a joke. And it is a joke. And it is also the single clearest thing anyone could say about the truth Miley revealed. Because Dolly Parton, the woman, is not the same as Dolly Parton, the image. And she knows it better than anyone. And on that night in that contest, the image beat the woman at being herself. The armor had become so specific, so perfected, so much its own creation, that the person who built it could stand right next to it and lose. She'd made something bigger than she was. That was always the plan. She just got to feel, for one funny, humbling evening, exactly how much bigger. Notice the exact word Miley reached for when she finally described her godmother. She did not say the makeup. She did not say the glamour. She said the full drag. And that word is more precise than a lot of people realize. Because the community that understood Dolly first, long before the culture caught up, was the drag community. The men in wigs and rhinestones who saw what she was doing and recognized it as one of their own. Because that is, in the end, what she built. A drag act. A gorgeous, exaggerated, deliberately artificial character, performed with total commitment, that says something truer than a plain face ever could. The only difference, the only one, is that the character Dolly built her whole life impersonating was herself. She is her own greatest impersonator. She invented a version of Dolly Parton so complete and so specific that other people could win contests performing it. And then she spent 60 years performing it too, better than anyone, because it was hers. That is why she loved the impersonators instead of resenting them, why she entered their contest as a joke, why she has always been a fierce and loyal friend to community. The country music world often was not. They understood her. They knew the secret before Miley ever said it out loud. They knew that a made-up face can be the most honest thing about a person, that you can tell the deepest truth about who you are by building who you wish to be and living inside it with your whole heart. Dolly was doing drag before most of the world had a word for what she was doing, and she was doing it of herself. And the wig and the paint and the rhinestones were never a lie. They were a costume worn so faithfully and for so long that it stopped being a costume and became the truest thing she owned. That is the woman Miley grew up beside. Not a diva hiding cruelty behind glitter. A poor mountain girl who built a self so complete it could win contests she herself couldn't. Who gave the whole world a friend and kept for herself only the parts a person has a right to keep. And who did it all so gracefully that most people never noticed there was a door there at all. Miley noticed. Miley grew up on the other side of that door, one of the few ever let through it. And that is why her small, quiet sentence about letting everyone in, and no one in, cut deeper than 1,000 magazine profiles ever did. Here is the part of the truth that turns it from sad to something better. And it is the part the scandal hunters never bother to look at because there is no dirt in it. The same control that keeps the door closed is what lets her open her hands so wide. Think about it the way she must think about it. If you have made yourself completely safe, completely finished, completely armored, then you can afford to give everything else away, because nothing anyone does can reach the part you've protected. And so Dolly Parton, the woman who guards her private self more carefully than almost anyone alive, is also one of the most openly generous, famous people who has ever lived. And the two things are not a contradiction. They are the same decision seen from both sides. The clearest example goes straight back to the wound that started everything. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, the hardest working man she knew, the man who paid the doctor with a sack of cornmeal, could not read or write. He was brilliant, she has always said, sharp and capable and wise, and the world never got to see it because nobody ever taught him his letters, and it shamed him his whole life, and it broke her heart. So in the mid-1990s, she started something called the Imagination Library, and the idea was simple and enormous. Every month, a free book mailed to a child, from the day they are born until the day they start school, no matter how poor the family is, no matter where they live. It started in her own home county in Tennessee, the same hills where she and her father came from nothing. And it grew, and it grew, and it has now mailed hundreds of millions of books to children all over the world. She let the children call her the book lady, and she made sure her father knew before he died that the whole thing existed because of him, that his own daughter had built a machine to make sure no other child would ever feel the shame he carried. She called him the book lady's daddy. She has said it was the thing that made him proudest in his whole life, prouder than any of her records or movies, that the little girl he once paid a doctor a bag of cornmeal to deliver had grown up to teach millions of poor children to read in his name. Do the arithmetic of that life for a second. A doctor paid in cornmeal at the beginning, hundreds of millions of books mailed to children by the end. That is the whole distance she traveled, measured not in records sold or dollars earned, but in the exact wound she was born into, and the exact repair she spent her life making. She did not forget where she came from, and then perform remembering it for the cameras. She built the remembering into the machine, permanently, so that a poor child somewhere is opening a book right now tonight, because a girl in a rag coat was once made to feel that having nothing meant being nothing, and grew up determined that no other child would ever have to believe that lie. That is what the armor is for, not to hide from the world, to be safe enough to save it. The girl who was laughed at for being poor built a fortress around her own heart. Yes, but she built it so that she could spend the rest of her life reaching back down the mountain and pulling other people up. Dollywood was jobs for her region. The Imagination Library was reading for the poor. There were the millions she quietly gave, the disaster fund she started when the wildfires burned her people out of their homes, the money she put into medical research without needing her name on it. She gives and gives and gives because she made herself untouchable first, and an untouchable person can afford to be generous in a way a frightened one never can. Control on the inside, open hands on the outside, everyone in. Miley understood this better than anyone, because she watched it up close for her whole life, and because she is the one person who was ever going to be tempted to become a copy of it. She sat across from David Letterman once and tried to explain it, and she landed on the exact thing this whole story is about. She said that what her old show had dramatized as a fun premise, the girl who becomes a superstar when she puts on the wig, Dolly had simply been living for real her entire life. She's always in the wig, Miley said, and she's always in the dolly. And then she said the sharpest part. It's not about the performance of creating the character, meaning it isn't an act she puts on and takes off. There is no backstage where the real Dolly is waiting to come out. The public Dolly is not a mask over the private one. She is the private one, made complete and made safe and made shareable. The same warm, resilient, hardworking woman, only without the burden of ever having to be endlessly available or perfectly bare. And Miley, who was raised to worship her, made a point of refusing to. She has said she does not like calling Dolly an idol because she doesn't want to worship her. She wants to love her like family, the way you love a real person and not a statue. And in the same breath, she has called her the best living angel on earth, and a living fantasy, and said that meeting your hero can sometimes be better than the dream of them. Both again, not an idol, a person, and also an angel. She holds the two together because Dolly taught her how. Taught her that a person can be a shining, guarded, careful creation, and a completely real and loving human being at the same moment. And that the trick of a good life is learning to be both, without letting either one eat the other. That is the inheritance, not the wig, not the rhinestones. The wig and the rhinestones were only ever the visible part. The real thing Dolly handed down was the whole philosophy underneath them. Build yourself so strong that no one can take you, then give yourself away. The tenderness between them lives in small private things, the kind of things that never make the tabloids because there is nothing scandalous in them, only love. Dolly's favorite way to reach the people she cares about is by fax. Of all the old-fashioned things, a machine most of the world forgot, humming out a page in her own words. And on Mother's Day she has faxed Miley letters, and Miley has read them and come apart. One of them said, "How much do I love you? As much as my heart can hold and as far as my arms can reach." Miley has said she chokes up rereading it, that she keeps it, that a single sheet of fax paper from her godmother can undo her. There is even a story about Dolly sending Miley a life-sized mannequin of herself, dressed in one of her signature outfits, a whole standing Dolly to keep in the house, which is exactly the kind of gift that is funny and strange, and completely, perfectly Dolly. The woman who turned herself into an image so complete you could order a copy of it and stand it in the corner. Miley laughs about it, but underneath the joke there is the real thing, which is that Dolly wanted the girl to always have a piece of her nearby, even a rhinestone statue of the armor, because the love was that big and that constant. Then in the fall of 2024, they found out the love had been literal all along. A genealogy company went digging through billions of old records and family trees, back through the Tennessee and Appalachian bloodlines that tangle together over the centuries, the way mountain families do, and they discovered that Dolly Parton and Miley Cyrus are actually related by blood, seventh cousins once removed to be exact. They share an ancestor, a man named John Brickey, born in 1740 in Virginia, who moved his family to Blount County, Tennessee, and lived out his life about 20 miles from the spot where Dollywood now stands. Dolly descends from one of his daughters. Miley descends from another. The fairy godmother, it turned out, was real family, had been the whole time, going back nearly 300 years to a common grandfather in the same hills. When they told Dolly, she lit up. She said, "Is that true? That's amazing." And then she said the thing that makes the whole discovery land. She said it did not surprise her, because Miley does feel like family, and honestly she'd have guessed they were closer than that. Third cousins, 10th cousins, something. The blood just confirmed what she'd always known in her chest. She'd chosen this child as family before the child was born, had loved her as a daughter for 30 years, and now a computer full of old records had come along to tell her what her own heart had told her since the beginning. Of course they were kin. She'd have been more surprised to learn they weren't. But blood or no blood, the truest sign of family was always the honesty, the willingness to say the hard thing, the tough love Miley says she can always count on. When Miley put out a song called "Used to Be Young," a reflective, wistful thing about looking back on her wild years, Dolly listened to it and gave her verdict, and it was not a soft one. She told Miley she wasn't sure she liked it, and the reason was pure Dolly. She said it wasn't fair for Miley to be singing about not being young when she was still young and beautiful, and here Dolly was near 80, and that song should have been hers. She was half teasing, but she was half telling the truth about her own life too, about being a woman near the end of a long road, looking at a young one near the start of hers, and feeling, honestly, that the song about lost youth belonged to the person who'd actually lost it. Miley took it. She has said she sometimes even wondered whether she needed to release the song at all. That is what tough love from Dolly does. It doesn't wound you. It just makes you think harder, because you know she's the one person who will never lie to you to make you feel good. And when the worst happened, when a wildfire tore through California and burned Miley's home to the ground, it was Dolly who told her how to stand back up, and the advice came straight from the deepest well of her own life. She did not tell Miley to hide, to cancel, to disappear until the pain passed. She told her something harder. She told her that a moment of trauma is not the time for an entertainer to shut down, that it is exactly the time to keep being a source of joy and light for the people watching, because that is the job, that is the calling, that is what you owe them. It sounds almost brutal until you remember where Dolly learned it. She learned it in the early 1980s, sitting alone with a gun in the nightstand, while the whole world watched her smile on television. She learned it the hardest way there is, that the show does not stop for your heartbreak, and that finding a way to keep giving light even when your own has gone out is not a lie you tell the audience. It is the bravest and most generous thing a broken person can do. She'd done it. Now she was teaching the girl to do it too. The armor again, always the armor. But by now you understand it isn't cold, and you understand it isn't fake, and you understand it isn't vanity. It is the discipline of a woman who decided her pain would never be the public's problem, and who turned that decision into 60 years of light for other people, and who is now handing the whole hard, beautiful lesson down to the child she'd loved since before she was born. So we come back to the question this whole audience has always really been asking about Dolly Parton. The question underneath all the others, not what did she hide, what was real, in an image that manufactured, in a face that painted, in a body that surgically maintained, in a persona that controlled down to the last rhinestone. Where is the actual woman? What part of Dolly Parton is true? And the answer Miley gave us, the answer that took a lifetime inside the house to see clearly, is the one nobody expected. All of it is real. That's the trick. That's the thing the outsiders could never quite hold in their heads. Most famous people have two selves, and everyone knows it. There is the polished public one they sell, and there is the real private one. And the whole game of celebrity gossip is the hunt for the gap between them. The moment the mask slips, and you see the true person underneath, meaner or sadder or emptier than the image promised. The press spent 60 years hunting for that gap in Dolly. They were sure it was there, a woman that shiny had to be hiding a colder, uglier truth. And they never found it, and they never found it, and they never found it. And the reason is that with Dolly there is no gap of that kind. The public self is not a mask over a different private self. The public self is the private self, styled and armored and made safe to share. She has said this herself for decades, and people kept not believing her because it sounded too simple. She has said the look is completely artificial, that she built it on purpose, that it is a fantasy, a cartoon, a poor girl's dream of what a movie star should be. And she has said in the same breath that it is entirely her, that this fantasy is who she actually is inside, that the exaggeration is not a lie about her nature, but the truest possible expression of it. She is a small, quiet woman from a mountain who genuinely, sincerely, all the way down to the bone, loves tall hair and bright paint and rhinestones and glamour, who looked at a so-called town tramp as a child and felt her whole soul reach toward that brightness. The image is fake the way a painting is fake, which is to say it is made, it is chosen. It is not a candid photograph of a face, and it is also more honest than any candid photograph, because it shows you exactly what she wanted to be, which is a truer thing to know about a person than what they happen to look like before coffee. And if you ever doubt that the real woman is in there, that under all the manufactured shine, there is a person telling the whole truth, you do not have to break down her door to find her. You just have to listen to what she wrote, because here is the great secret that was never a secret at all. Dolly Parton hides her face and gives away her soul, and she gives it away in the songs, and she always has. Go back to the coat. She could have kept that humiliation buried forever, the way most people bury the day the other children laughed at them. Instead, she wrote Coat of Many Colors, a song that tells the entire story. The rags, the pride, the mockery, the mother sewing love into scraps, and she gave it to the whole world to sing. The most private wound of her childhood, handed out like a hymn. She has called it the song she is proudest of. She took the thing that shamed her and made it the thing that saved her, and then she made it a gift. And that is the smaller end of it. She wrote songs so honest they got banned. She wrote Down from Dover, about a young unmarried woman, pregnant and abandoned and cast out, whose baby is born dead, and radio would not play it because it told a truth about how the world treated ruined girls that nobody wanted said out loud. She wrote about an orphanage burned down, about children abused, about a woman standing in a bargain store, comparing herself to second-hand goods and asking to be taken home anyway. She wrote Jolene out of her own jealousy over a bank teller. She wrote I Will Always Love You out of the pain of leaving the man who trapped her. The face stays finished and the songs stay naked, and both are Dolly, and the songs are where she has been telling you the truth about her whole self, the entire time, in plain sight, while you were busy looking for it behind the wig. That is what people miss when they call her fake. The most made-up woman in America is also one of the most confessional writers in the history of American song. She kept exactly one thing private, her bare face, her literal skin, and she put nearly everything else, the poverty, the shame, the jealousy, the heartbreak, straight into music and sang it to millions. You wanted to know what was real. It was playing on the radio the whole time. She turned that paradox into a lifetime of jokes, and the jokes were armor too. She said she'd have herself buried in a pink casket, done up perfect, so she could go out looking as good as she came in. She made the wig the punchline before anyone else could reach for it. She named her own fakeness out loud, over and over cheerfully, from every stage she stood on. Every one of those lines does the same work. It says, before you can laugh at me for being fake, watch me laugh at it first, louder, and turn the fakeness into the point. You cannot expose a woman who has already confessed everything and made it her brand. There is nothing to catch her at. She told you it was a wig. She told you it was surgery. She told you she sleeps in her makeup. She handed you every secret except the one that was actually hers, the bare face, and she handed you the rest so cheerfully that you never noticed the one door she kept. That is what Miley meant by letting everyone in and no one in. She lets you all the way into the fantasy. She holds nothing of the persona back. You get every rhinestone, every joke, every warm and generous inch of the creation, and she keeps, for herself alone, the small, unfinished human being who invented it, the girl in the rag coat, the woman without the paint, the person Carl Dean married, in secret in Georgia and loved for 60 years, and took the knowledge of to his grave. You know Dolly Parton completely. You have never met her at all. Both are true. They were always both true. And the strangest, most moving part is that she is not lonely inside that arrangement, or not in the way you'd think. She made the choice young and she made it clean, and she has never once regretted it. She got the love of the whole world and the safety of the closed door, and she decided a long time ago that this was a fair trade, maybe the best trade a poor mocked mountain girl could ever hope to make. The world would never see her cry. The world would also never leave her. She would be finished, and she would be adored, and she would be, in the only way she ever wanted to be, undeniable. She'd promised herself that in a schoolroom. She kept the promise for 80 years. In January of 2026, Dolly Parton turned 80 years old, and the way she marked it tells you the whole story has come to rest exactly where it began, in the mountains, in music, with the people she loves, and the light she has always insisted on giving. She gathered a group of women around a song. Miley was one of them, of course, the goddaughter, the seventh cousin, the family, Lainey Wilson, Queen Latifah, Reba McEntire. Voices from across the whole width of American music came together with her to record a new version of one of her own old songs, and the money from it would go to help children with cancer. And the song they chose is the one that closes the circle so perfectly you could almost forget it was true. It was called Light of a Clear Blue Morning. She wrote it back in the 1970s, in the years when she was breaking free from Porter Wagoner, when she was leaving the cage and stepping out on her own with no guarantee the world would follow her. It is a song about the morning that breaks after a long, hard night, about knowing in your chest that everything is going to be all right before there is any proof of it at all. She wrote it as a young woman clawing her way out of a trap. She sang it as an 80-year-old woman who had by then clawed her way out of every trap there is. The poverty, the cage, the breakdown, the gun in the nightstand, the loss of the only man who ever saw her bare. 50 years apart, the same song, the same light, the same woman insisting that the morning comes. And she sang it the year after she buried Carl. That is the thing to hold as we come to the end. She turned 80 having just lost the one person who knew her without the armor, and she did not disappear into her grief. And she did not let the world see her broken, and she did not stop giving light. She wrote her own instructions for exactly this moment, decades ago, and she followed them. She gathered the young women she'd mentored, and the ones who came after her, and she put her name to a song about the darkness ending, and she pointed all of it at sick children. And she did it in the full drag, the full hair, the full face at 80. A year into being a widow, still finished, still shining, still undeniable. Everyone who started the road with her is nearly gone now. Porter, gone since 2007, forgiven long before the end, held at his deathbed by the woman he could never quite hold onto. Her parents gone, Carl gone, Judy aging beside her, the mountain still standing, the theme park still running, the books still going out to children who will never know they were sent, in the name of a man who couldn't read. And in the middle of all of it, the girl from the rag coat, 80 years old, still in the wig, still keeping the one door closed, still letting the whole world in. If you are the kind of person who has followed her all these years, you feel your own life in that number, 80. You watched her when you were young, and now you are not young, and she is not young, and the two of you have grown old on either side of a television screen, without ever meeting. There is a particular ache in watching the stars of your own youth reach this age, in counting who is left, in seeing the roll of names that have gone quiet, and knowing your own name is somewhere on a list like that too. She knows it better than anyone. She has buried nearly everyone. She has written her own funeral instructions, the pink casket, done up perfect, because even death is not going to catch her unfinished. It is the same vow from the schoolroom, carried all the way to the far end of a life. She will meet the last thing the way she met the first thing, ready, painted, undeniable, and giving light to the very end, because that is the only way she ever learned to carry pain, hers or anyone's, and it has never once failed her. There is something steadying in that. For the people who grew up on her, the world keeps taking the icons of your youth, one by one, and here is one who is still standing, still working, still in full drag at 80, still refusing to be diminished by any of it. She is not pretending the losses did not happen. She is doing what she has always done, which is to keep the grief on her own side of the door and keep the light on yours. That was always the arrangement. It is the last thing she is still giving you, and she is giving it while carrying more than you will ever be allowed to see. Miley stood beside her through it. The child Dolly had known since before she was born, now a grown woman who had murdered her own Hannah and survived it, who had been crucified and come back, who had learned the armor from the inside and put it on and won her Grammys in it, who had figured out the thing about her godmother that took the rest of the world 60 years and a magazine cover to hear. She stood next to Dolly and sang about the clear blue morning, one more voice in the circle, family by love and family by blood. And if you knew the whole story, you could feel the weight of everything underneath that simple picture. The old woman and the young one, the one who built the armor and the one she'd handed it down to, both of them singing about the light that comes after the dark, because both of them had earned the right to. There is a difference between privacy and secrecy, and it is the difference that the people hunting Dolly Parton for 60 years never understood, and it is the whole reason they came up empty. Secrecy is what you keep because you are ashamed of it. Privacy is what you keep because it is yours. A secret is a thing you hide because it would hurt you if it came out. A private thing is a thing you hold back simply because you have the right to, because a person is allowed to own some corner of themselves that the whole world does not get to touch. The tabloids were hunting for a secret, a buried shame, a crime, a lie, a hidden self worse than the public one. What Dolly actually had was privacy, and a lot of it fiercely kept. Her bare face was not a shame. Her marriage was not a scandal. Her heartbreak was not a crime. They were hers. That was the only reason she guarded them. And you cannot expose a person's privacy the way you expose a person's secret, because there is nothing rotten in it to reveal. There is only a human being exercising the oldest right there is, the right to keep a little of yourself for yourself. There was no scandal at the bottom of Dolly Parton. That is what all the digging finally proved. The truth Miley revealed was never a buried sin. It was a discipline of love learned in a schoolroom, kept for a lifetime, handed down in the end to the one child who could understand it. And so we come back to where we started, to the small quiet sentence that opened all of this. She lets everyone in and no one in at the same time. Everyone feels like they know her, and everyone is fine that they will never see her without the makeup, without the full drag. For almost 60 years people looked at that sentence, or looked at the life that sentence describes, and assumed there had to be something dark behind the closed door, because why else would a woman guard it so hard? They were looking for the wrong thing. They were looking for a sin, and what was behind the door was a wound, not a crime. A little girl in a coat of many colors, held down by laughing children, deciding in that moment that the world had lost the right to ever see her unfinished. Everything came from that. The wigs came from that. The paint she sleeps in came from that. The one door she never opened, not for the press, not for the fans, not even in grief, came from that. She was not hiding an ugly secret. She was protecting a hurt child for 80 years, the only way she knew how. And look what she did with the protecting. Most people who build a wall that high build it to keep the world out. She built hers so she could let the world all the way in, made safe behind the armor. She gave away almost everything a person can give. Her songs, which told the truth her face never would. Her warmth, to strangers and to the crew at the bottom of the call sheet, and to a nation that felt she was family. Her money, quietly to sick children, and to burned out towns, and to millions of kids getting a free book in the mail, in the name of a father who never learned to read. Even the people who hurt her got her forgiveness. Porter, who caged her, held at the end by the woman he could not hold on to. The tabloids who invented her fake husband, met with a wink and a joke. She made villains out of no one, because a woman who has already made herself safe does not need enemies. She can afford to understand everybody. She could afford everything except the loss of the one man who ever saw her bare, and even that she carried the way she carried all of it, behind the door in the full drag. At 80, a year a widow, still shining, still giving light, still keeping her one small thing for herself. That is the truth Miley Cyrus revealed. Not a scandal, not a lie. A girl who was laughed at for being poor, who swore she'd never be caught unfinished again, and who kept that vow so faithfully and so gracefully that she turned it into the warmest public life in America and handed the whole hard secret down in the end to the one child who grew up close enough to understand it. Find your armor, put it on, then you can afford to open your heart. You knew her for 50 years, you never met her once, and now you know why. The finished face you always saw was the gift. The plain one underneath was the only thing she ever kept, and she had earned the right to keep it in a schoolroom a very long time ago, wearing a coat of many colors that her mother made out of love and rags.